how do you approach training someone as a personal trainer with either type 1 or type 2?
Yeah, so let's start with type 2. Okay, so obviously there's quite a few medications out there now with, as we discussed pre-podcast, semaglutide and metformin and X, Y, and Z, and we're gonna kind of brush over those and assume that you're in a place where you can train without collapsing and dying on the floor. I mean, that training might not look that intense. It might just be a walk around the block or X, Y, and Z. Yeah. But let's assume you can train and you're not going to die. Yeah. Okay. Touch wood. For the approach to them, so exercise, type 2 diabetes is caused from two things. So high glucose food, basically, or food that is going to increase your blood glucose levels, and the underutilization of exercise. So imagine the body's a system. So of our system, 80% of total glucose consumed from food is absorbed by the skeletal muscle. Right. Which is a huge amount. Yeah, so your biggest store in the body of glycogen and glucose is your skeletal muscle system. Right. So obviously through training, through X, Y, and Z, we can not only increase the potential volume of those stores through increasing your skeletal muscle mass, but also we can increase the uptake of glucose into those stores through exercising. So when we exercise, during contraction, there is certain proteins and transmembrane proteins that uptake glucose. Right. So during lots of like cyclical contractions, like sitting on a bike, we can uptake glucose without insulin, which is huge for type 2, type 1, and non-diabetics. Yeah. And so you can have glucose-free, insulin-free glucose uptake during exercise, which is why it's the number one treatment process for type 2 diabetics that don't respond to medication is exercise. Because not only is it effective, but there's some processes in the body that only respond to exercise, not drugs. So with that glucose, with that glucose uptake, it is purely exercise dependent. So you're not going to get that stimulus or that response through taking drugs. Yeah. You have to exercise to get that glucose uptake. So, that's a pretty good way to wrap it up, mate. If you're type 1, if you're type 2, this is a guy. Not only can he tell you how to inject, when to inject, how to monitor, but he said it in black and white there. There's a lot of stuff that can be done with drugs, but there's actually a lot that just needs to be done with physical exercise. And I think a lot of it though, mate, which is where your mindset is quite unique. A lot of it is for type 2, the mindset and the relationship around sport and physical exercise, 90% of the time is going to be quite poor. Definitely. Because it is a sedentary, bad food, bad lifestyle disease. I couldn't agree more. And not only that, they probably, for a lot of these people, it's intimidating. Yeah. The people around or associated with exercises like myself and yourself, right? For a lot of these overweight type 2 diabetics, it's going to be intimidating. And the perceived emotion of that outcome of exercise is going to be tough. Yes. And it will be, but it doesn't mean it's unmanageable. You know, even if it's a walk around the block, they're still beneficial in some ways. It may be a walk that you wouldn't have done previously. And I mean, I was listening to a podcast recently of a coach that used to work here, and he had that story of one of his clients lost 150 kilos. Yeah. And you know, they started with seated exercises, you know, losing weight through not even standing on their own with their own body weight, just through movement seated, you know, it's movement they wouldn't have done otherwise, you know. And so there's always a starting point. There may be tough, maybe some conversations you have to figure it out with, but there can always be a starting point for sure.